All right, I'm going to say that we are live on Facebook. So I want to say good evening, Facebook. My name is Peter Franzen. I'm live here from my kitchen, and this is Seams Cares, hashtag Seam Cares. It's a weekly Facebook Live event that we've been doing for the last 9 or 10 weeks during the whole coronavirus situation. I'm watching the comments section of this, of what we're doing tonight here on my phone next to me. So please join the conversation with your questions or just say hi. We'll be sharing any resources that come up. We'll put those in the comment section too. I want to thank you for making the time to join us. I know that there's a lot of things that you could be doing, and that I'm asking you to spend some time with us on a video screen when our screen time is already up, but you know, it's helping us stay connected. So there's that. Tonight, our guest is the newly appointed superintendent of the Normandy Schools Collaborative, Marcus Robinson. I'm going to ask Marcus about his plans for the district and how he is preparing for the uncertainty ahead this fall. Now, the comments section are there for you, and the reason I prefer these live videos and why it bums me out when Facebook and Zoom and we have technical issues, I prefer doing this and knowing that you're out there. You know, if you're like me, this whole pandemic is driving you a little batty. I want to hear from you if you're watching this live, and I want to hear how you're dealing with stress during coronavirus. If I'm keeping it real, and honestly, I prefer to keep it real, this Tuesday night thing that we do is just one of the ways that I can remember what day of the week it is between that and our Zoom staff meetings. But kidding aside, I count myself lucky for still having a job during all of this, naturally from my income, but also, you know, just for my sanity. As I recently read on Facebook, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. I think that's important to remember as we all go through this storm. You know, there's two little things that I've missed during the stay-at-home orders that I don't expect to get back anytime soon. You know, first, I noticed that I'm feeling a little robbed of simple pleasures. When I think back on grocery shopping before all this, it doesn't even compare. You know, it used to be enjoyable, but now it's become a chore, and one that you really have to prepare for. You have to suit up and boot up and go through the protocol from the time you leave your house until the time you get home. You have to grab your mask, grab your wipes, hide your kids, hide your wife. You know, I used to get stressed if the store was out of the product that I wanted, but now I just find myself moving on to the next thing, just knowing that it might be like this for a while. And the other thing that I miss is people's faces in real life, even the ugly ones. I go to the park with my dog twice a day, and most of us there don't wear face coverings, just out exercising, except for in crowded areas. But I'm talking about, you know, in the stores and other places, it can be disorienting to not see the human faces that have always been a part of most of our reality, certainly for sighted people, but just seeing half the face. But, you know, I don't want to belabor the negative. My herb garden, some lettuce, blueberries, tomato plant, all in the ground at my house. And that's been a welcome warm weather diversion for me. So let me know, are you doing anything to keep up your spirits? Let me see in the comments section if you are. I'm following here on my cell phone any minute now. And while you leave comments, let me introduce tonight's guest. And this is him. This month, the paths of Marcus Robinson and the Normandy Schools Collaborative formally intersected in a whole new way as Marcus was named the district's new superintendent effective May 1. And if you're in the St. Louis area, then you probably already know that the Normandy Schools Collaborative, formerly the Normandy School District, has struggled for some years. And since the early 90s, when the state of Missouri established the current accreditation system, the district never did better than the rating of provisionally accredited. And then in 2012, after almost 20 years of provisional accreditation, the district unfortunately, but finally lost its accreditation altogether, becoming one of a handful of Missouri public school districts that lost that accreditation around that same time. The state of Missouri intervened. It took control of the district and created a state-appointed board. Then, under a provision in Missouri law that allows students living in an unaccredited school district, they have the right to transfer to a neighboring accredited higher performing district. And back then, over 1,000 students from the Normandy School District filed for transfer. So since then, the district has made some small gains, and supporters of the district, its leadership and staff are working to improve student outcomes. And of course, then enter Marcus Robinson. Marcus is a St. Louis native, but his career has taken him other places too. Marcus returned to St. Louis a few years ago to help co-found the New Opportunity Trust and served as that group's executive in residence. Before that, he served as the CEO of the Memphis Education Fund. It's a group that I would describe as similar to the Opportunity Trust here. And he was the chancellor and CEO of Tindley Accelerated Schools, and that was a charter school network in Indianapolis. And it's worth pointing out that under his leadership, Tindley received the United States Department of Education Blue Ribbon School Award in 2010, and the Title I Distinguished School Award for closing the achievement gap. Did I just call that the achievement gap? It's actually known as the achievement gap. Before all that, Marcus was a classroom teacher. As for his own education, he graduated from the Pattonville School District, but as a younger child, he lived in Belda City and attended McKinley Elementary in the Normandy School District. So I will stop there and welcome Marcus Robinson. Marcus, any corrections there to my introduction?
None whatsoever. You were very thorough and much too kind.
Accolades, you deserve it. Hey, Marcus, I would like to just start out by getting your take on something. The pandemic is causing us all to, I feel like keep our eyes on the road ahead because we don't really know what's coming next and we want to be ready. But to start our conversation tonight, I'd like you to remind our audience about the challenges that we were already facing before this unwanted pandemic rolled into town. Marcus, before all this, how would you describe the state of education in Missouri and really, in America? What were we facing? I mean, now we're focused on the pandemic, but it just seemed like a few months ago, we were talking about a lot of different issues.
We were already in a period of destabilization and light speed changes. I call them 2 A's, and automation and artificial intelligence dramatically changing our workforce, not being a labor-centered economy, really going into a service or information-centered economy, and what that means for preparation for our students. And so we were already in a destabilized place in trying to get our kids toward more rigorous standards and preparing them for a job market that very few of us understand in the next 20 years. And so to have this discontinuity of learning where kids are out of schools further complicates that issue, especially when we're not really even sure what reentry will look like and whether or not we'll have discontinuous learning happening to us again as early winter sets in. We're back in flu season and people expect an uptick in COVID-19 kind of diagnoses. And so many people are talking about the new normal, and I think we'd already been in a space where we're trying to define what the new normal is. And so this just gets added to the complement of things that we have to think about, whether it's the mitigation of poverty or whether it's the training of teachers for higher standards within both an urban and a rural context. We now have to say, well, what are the technological infrastructure issues we need to address to ensure that if we send a third grader home on Friday with a device and a mobile hotspot, that on Monday we can have some semblance of class the way we would have had it should that child have shown up to a brick and mortar building.
Right. Okay, you reminded me there was a lot going on before this even showed up.
Sure.
Well, Marcus, you've had in a career, I think atypical of getting to the superintendent's seat, but I think that that's great. I want to know what you feel like you've learned along the way, and what strategies do you think you'll need to employ in Normandy, to make that district, meet the needs of its students.
Yeah, well, I tell you what's really appealing about this role for me is that I walk in not having to worry about shifting mindsets. The joint executive governing board was already immersed in a strategic plan. And that strategic plan wasn't just about how do we clarify our district values and um, how we think about um, the vision of new programs. It really was centered on what is our vision on an ongoing basis for the graduate of Normandy High School. It's our graduate profile. And really becoming really clear on how we articulate our programs to align with that vision of a graduate. And so I think you got two choices under those circumstances. You either play it safe or you take a big risk. And safe says, well, if we've struggled and been provisionally accredited for over a decade, then the safe move ultimately is to say, we'll make incremental growth. We'll graduate some more kids. We may send 10% of our population to a four-year college or university, or you'll talk about other pathways. And this board and the strategic planning committee of stakeholders from the community, staff, people, parents, et cetera, have really been very ambitious about saying, no, this is about setting a high bar for what the Normandy graduate will look like, which is, I think, really risky because that means sacrifice. That means transition in terms of how we think about high school graduation, and what it takes to get there. That means a transition in terms of quality of life and how we think about the school day and the school year. That means a transition in terms of how we think about professional development and how we grow teachers. And so um, I have published an entry plan on our website, on our board documents that people are free to go and read. But ultimately, it says over the next 3 months, we're going to get crystal clear about a few things. The first is this whole question of school culture, that we've heard from too many of our kids and our staff members that there is a disruptive environment in our classrooms and our corridors. And so settling on a school culture that is positioned on success is a top priority for us in resetting in this way.
What
Uh,
does, can I ask you, I'm sorry, how does that, what do you do to establish school culture? I know how important that is, having seen so many schools and seeing, how dependent that is on a strong leader and someone with a vision, and that's what I know you're bringing to it. How's that operationalized? How do you establish culture?
yeah. Well, you're going to establish it either way you want to think about it. I remember, Peter, when we were younger men with less gray hair, that Jane Whitman said to us that you will either program for the kids or the kids will program for you.
Program for you. That's
You will
right.
not like that program. And so I think the same way about school culture. Like we either set the tone in not just our expectations and consequences, but our routines, rituals, and rites of passage, how we do school on a daily basis, or the kids set the tone. And so we have to get crystal clear, not just on what the rules are, but what the routines are. Train our staff on that, and then train our kids on that when they re-enter the space after having been gone for half a year. And then being doggedly consistent about those expectations, because when you're consistent, kids get it.
Yes.
When you're inconsistent, then kids don't trust that you mean what you say. And ultimately, whatever the paradigm you have is falls apart. No matter what the structure you put in, whether it's PBIS or it's restorative learning, it doesn't really matter. And so being very consistent about those cultural aims will be really important. So that's first. If our kids don't feel safe to learn, then everything else is off the table. The second thing is we've got to get to rigorous content, and we believe that that starts with reading. And so implementing some early literacy content pre-K through 5 at least, potentially pre-K through 8, really focusing on training teachers in that content to be able to execute with fidelity, that will be important. If kids can't read the text, it doesn't matter what we're trying to teach them, whether it's history or science. They need access. They need to be great readers. And right now, about 15.4% of our kids are proficient in English language arts, which is intolerable. We will pilot some programs in mathematics where 7.3% of our kids are proficient or advanced. But we will come in with rigorous content in an effort to ensure that our kids are getting what they need to be prepared.
Right.
And I guess the inevitable question is like, well, what's the sweet spot with that? And I think that too frequently we underestimate the role of adult learning, which is to say that if we come in with a new culture paradigm, if we hit our kids with new content, if we expect our teachers to be at a different level of instructional capacity to function like urban teachers, then at the same time, we have to add on, and thank you, Dr. Floyd, for this whole question of preparing them for pandemic response and continuity of learning, right? We don't just need the devices, but we have to train people to be able to use the devices. Then we have to create time for adult learning. So we're talking to the department about getting the space to be able to do front-loaded teacher training before the kids come back and ongoing weekly professional development with our team to continue to sharpen the saw with adults. And so a lot of people talk about accountability and holding teachers' feet to the fire and holding principals' feet to the fire. And they're not talking about the professional development that should front load that accountability, right? You should only expect the things that you've trained in people and that you've supported in your team. And so we intend to come to the table with a different continuum of support for the adults in our space as well.
Is there someone was asking a question about that, closing the gap in closing related to education test scores that are lower than 50% in math and reading, and you just cited some of that.
Yeah.
What is there more that you can say about, how you begin to close the achievement gap?
Sure. Some of it I've already said, which is you just need rigorous content. And right now we don't have that aligned. As we implement new ELA standards and a new approach to teaching reading, we haven't done an adoption in English language arts since the 2014-2015 school year. With that being said, we have some retooling to do, not just in reading, but in math and science and history. And as I've said before, that all has to be articulated to a high bar. And so what we look like at grade 5 should be on a skill ladder that crawls all the way to grade 12 and a rigorous outcome. And so when we know for sure that every 12th grader will need to take, let's just say, pre-calculus to get their high school diploma, we understand clearly what middle school math needs to look like, how we need to hold middle school math students accountable, and the kind of supports we need to put on the table for kids who are struggling to overcome that bar. And so Yvette Jackson from the National Urban Alliance, who's a former professor of mine, always talked about in her book, Pedagogy of Confidence, kids who are school dependent. Our kids don't have a Sylvan or a Kumon to go to. They don't have aunts and uncles with master's degrees and professional engineering licenses to rely on as a support beyond the school. And so as we put these high expectations on the table, we have to understand that we are the cavalry, that we are the knights in shining armor. And when kids struggle with those higher standards, we're going to have to be their supports beyond the school day, be their supports in the summer. And so building that infrastructure will be really important to get above that 50% that the person so adeptly asked about.
The buildings have been empty for a couple of weeks, empty of students, And since you started earlier this month, I guess you've been up there. Have you been touring the buildings and trying to get a sense of everything up there? And what are you going to need to do to prepare? So you talked about this plan. Physically, what are you going to have to do to prepare for the fall? And what are you anticipating?
Yeah. And so I think there's sort of the operational, and then there is sort of the academic. From an operational lens, um, we are starting to look at our cleaning protocols to ensure that we're disinfecting surfaces appropriately. We're talking about ways in which we can um, keep doors open, keep folks from having to be in too close a proximity. There has been a regional conversation around transportation that I just don't know is avoidable or escapable. At some point, you can't run a bus with 25% of the kids on the bus, and
Right.
so I don't know that you get to that. But how we think about how we clean and disinfect a school, I think is important. How we think about PPE for our staff members who have to encounter people who are potentially affected. How we think about taking temperatures at a distance. We are fortunate to have nurses and support from Affinia Health um, with our schools as a partner. And so I think we're able to respond quickly when we see um, perhaps an uptick in cases, and then define the protocols, at which point we're saying, okay, we've seen 2, 3 cases in this building. We need to shut it down until we figure out what's happening. I think ongoing, that's going to have to be our approach pre-K through 8. We have a different opportunity, I think, at our high school because we've got the square footage to reconceive how we think about high school space in the wave of the pandemics. And so tomorrow we spend time walking our high school campus with our architects to talk about how we move walls, how we think about flexible seating in such a way that if we get to the point where we need to create distance, that we can do that without sending these kids home. Because while I can catch an 8-year-old up who's missed a month of second grade, I don't feel the same way about a sophomore in chemistry
Right.
who is headed toward a dual enrollment class in science. And so in my mind, these are some of our most vulnerable students who are closer to the end game. And the more on our high school we can create the opportunities, whether that's controlling class sizes or broadening the rooms, I just think that's a place where we've got an opportunity to define and be a leader in this era about what continuity of learning looks like when we see a surgence of disease happening in our community.
What do you think? What is COVID teaching us about education? It seems like an inflection point. I've heard that word used more times than I can't believe I just said it again. Everyone's saying inflection point, but what does that mean? And are we moving to a unified virtual curriculum that's accessible by all, or what does this look
I certainly hope not, because there's no brain science to back that up. You know, folks don't grow from virtual connection. And if that were the case, I would say the most resourced kids would have already been on that train. But when you think about the kids with the greatest resources in our community who attend the most prestigious schools, the most expensive institutions, they have more social interaction and not less. My daughter was invited to visit a school most recently as she was contemplating high school that does no more than 12 to 14 kids in the room. You're not even allowed to bring your device. If they need you to have a device, they'll provide one for you because they value the intellectual discourse and connection between teacher and student. And so if these are the kids who become captains of industry, these are the kids who go to the elite colleges, these are the kids who have the most access to 21st century opportunities, then I think the wrong thing to do is to suggest that the poorest and most fragile kids in our community somehow will thrive because they got a new iPad and a hotspot. And so it's very much a crisis intervention. We're fortunate to be in an era where we can do this. But so I'm glad it didn't happen 20 years ago. But by the same token, it's not the way that any of us should be advocating for us to be raising kids in an era where we need more human contact, not less.
Yeah, if not
You-
advocating, it may be the only option for the at least for the short term, having
Well,
some kind of
but I'm
flexibility.
hoping industry will catch up, which is to say, the kind of conversation that you're facilitating. I mean, you're essentially, directing the kind of thing that would have taken a whole team of people to do 30 years ago. You're
Right.
doing from your kitchen,
Yep.
right? I'm hoping that the ed tech people who are frankly well financed, having been in education philanthropy for the last 4 years, I'm hoping that they're going to catch up and provide those platforms that make it more accessible for all kids when we have to be in these quarantine situations to be able to get as much access as they possibly can. And to be clear, the most affluent kids in our communities are already getting it. And so I have friends with kids in private school in Indianapolis and in St. Louis, and they see their teachers every day. They're having real classes every day. They have ways of real academic accountability every day. And while they're still socially distanced and that's hard on them, it's still not the same as some of our kids whose only interaction every day is to log into an automated platform where they're essentially interacting with a computer that shoots them a quiz, every 45 minutes to see if they've learned something. And so from that standpoint, we've got to get better at instructional delivery in this way. But I always am careful to say that's a stopgap. That's all. That should always be a temporary measure. And the people who say no, that might just be the way of the world, I don't think those people are serious.
Yeah. What before we're kind of winding down on time, Marcus, we have great parents, of course, who are watching, and there's a theme in the questions. One, sort of how your operating style. So somebody asked, if you're a superintendent who's in the trenches, and then presumably meaning, are you out there in the school buildings or are you sitting back in your office? And I know the answer to that. The second is, what about parents? So what
Yeah,
about parent engagement? Are parents welcome in the schools in Normandy
sure,
under your leadership, and how can
sure.
parents be involved?
Great questions. I am a teacher in my heart, and anybody who lets me come into their class and teach, I'm just going to do it. Um, Give me a book, give me some subject matter, and I'm gonna go after it. It's ultimately why I left educational philanthropy and came back to this chair, is because I missed that interaction and love to be connected to the kids and the families, the teachers and the principals who are doing this work. So I'm very much in the trenches and intend to spend my day in schools trying to figure out whether we are hitting that high bar. I do believe, though, that this is very much a partnership with families. When we start to say things like, hey, we're going to raise expectations, that ultimately means your child's going to spend more time on task. I need you to believe me that that's an issue of love and not an issue of punishment. That when I say, hey, we need additional time, this is because I care, not because I'm somehow ambivalent about what this child might have going on in life. And so the more parents are in school, the more they are connected to that reality. And it sends a message to kids about the connection between school and home. I don't need parents to tutor our students. We get paid to do that. I do need parents, though, to say, if this is what you're expected to do, then you're expected to do that. And my relationship with Ms. Jones, my relationship with Dr. Johnson is such that I stand behind the things that you're being asked to do. And so, if we want true partnership, we've got to build that. And so, one of the positions that we're adding at central office is the director of partnerships and community partnerships and engagement. Right. This has to be a welcoming place for families, not just because we have an attendance issue to cure, and we will, but because families have to see us as a resource, and not just when there's trouble. Um, and so one of the things I'm grateful for is the Normandy Schools Collaborative, I think, has a national model for partnerships, whether it's the work that we've done with Operation Food Search or the Little Bit Foundation, Beyond Housing. our ability to say we care about the things that are non-academic in your life have been magnanimous. We're going to grow that and integrate it into how we serve our families in an even deeper way by hiring somebody who can run that strategy full time.
What, I alluded to your background a little bit, Marcus, that unlike, many of your counterparts, that you don't come exclusively from a traditional public school district background. For example, when it comes to things like, charter schools that are currently trying to open in Normandy, as the former head of a successful charter school, what do you think they have to offer, and how do you anticipate you and the Normandy Schools Collaborative would interact with any charter schools that are successful in opening there?
Yeah. And so, I'm a big believer in public schools in general. And so public charter schools are a vehicle to give parents choice, especially in communities where they're locked out of choice. Um, I was fortunate, Peter. When I grew up in inner city St. Louis, we had the second largest voluntary transfer program in the country. Desegregation was my charter school when I was growing up, to get access to a different kind of opportunity beyond what was offered in my neighborhood. So I believe in that for all kids. I cannot be a beneficiary of choice and not be a supporter for choice. I'm hoping that we create great options in our school district, such that our parents feel like they already have great choices without having to do something different. But I'm also aware that there's a lot to do in a very short period of time. And I think it would be problematic for me as superintendent, for our governing board, to close the door on a discussion around potential partners who could help us with some contingency of the kids' need in our district in a shorter period of time. And so, I welcome the entree and the conversations. I know some folks are already having that discussion around potentially serving some families in Normandy. And if there's a good fit, I don't see why we wouldn't do the same thing that Indianapolis has done, the same thing that Denver has done, the same thing that great and fast moving urban school districts have done across the country, which is to say, yes, we have our own portfolio of great programs that we're running. We also have a portfolio of partners that we work with to do some things that we're not proficient in yet, and in order to serve our kids faster. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about those conversations.
Well, I know you want to restore confidence in the Normandy Schools Collaborative among a lot of families, and I guess, well, I'm glad you're here. I know that a lot of people are watching. A lot of people by Facebook Live standards, and I guess it's going to continue tomorrow evening. You're hosting a community forum. Do you want to tell us anything about that?
Yeah, so I very much feel like our work in Normandy is a movement, and so we've been having some internal conversations around our strategic plan. And last week we invited our families, our staff, to join that conversation. And now we're inviting the broader community to weigh in on what's happening and what needs to happen in Normandy. And so tomorrow evening, we'll be talking about our top priorities for the next 90 days, a new vision for Normandy, and just trying to get feedback from folks about what they think are the most pressing issues facing our district. Access to that can be gained through our website, which is normandysc.org, Normandy Schools Collaborative, normandysc.org. But we invite folks to come and be a part of that conversation. And I think it'll be the first of many. Ultimately, this leads to a continuum of initiatives, and we'll be spending the summer working through that. And so hopefully we'll build some friends and partners who want to come and be a part of that in person, appropriately socially distanced, but in person as we try to work on some plans.
That's awesome. That is great. Marcus, I appreciate you joining us here tonight live and sharing that in your new role. And I know there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. I want to remind everyone, I want to thank people for joining us and watching, and let you know that we're posting this video. It'll be on the Scene Facebook page, so you can go back and people can share it with others. Next week, we're going to be joined by Maxine Clark, the founder of Build-A-Bear and local philanthropist and part of Blueprint for Summer. She'll be joined by a Blueprint for Summer staff person, Zasmine Johnson. We'll be talking about summer in St. Louis. And so I invite everyone to come back for that. Marcus, again, I just want to thank you and wish you, Godspeed and good luck up there. I know you're going to do great things, and people are here to support you. There's a lot of supportive comments happening on Facebook. You can go back and see those, and know that people are here for you.
Well, Peter, thank you and the team at Seeing for the work that you do. We've come a long way since Camp Tambo, my friend, but I believe we're going to get some great things happening.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thanks, Marcus.
Take care.